Hello, my name is Shawn Williams, and I'm the Associate Professor of Political Science here at Campbellsville University. Thank you for joining us and for signing in to one of our podcasts where we're interviewing local candidates for statewide, regional, and local offices that are important here to Central Kentucky. I'm joined today by one of our guests. If you don't mind introducing yourself and telling us a bit about you.
My name is Richard Steele. I am a candidate for state representative in the 51st District. It's Taylor and Adair counties. And I have been here in Campbellsville for about 30 years, and it is home. So I enjoy the people here, and I want to be their representative.
What are some of the previous experiences that you've had that you feel like have prepared you well for this office?
I've done problem solving both as a business owner and in my current job where I'm working between a store and customers and resolving issues. I've had experience in public speaking and in leadership in both in church, in school, to some degree in the community, and so I know how to deal in the different situations that I think I would have to face as a representative.
What is motivating you to run? What are some of the top priorities that you feel like government needs to address that you would want to fix if you're elected to office?
The primary thing that I'm wanting to address are the issues going on with education and with our educators, and also with workers in Kentucky. The passage of a right-to-work law, I think, is bad for Kentucky, bad for Kentuckians, that it generally does not raise wages, it lowers wages and lowers the skill level of the people doing that. And with the education, the work with teachers' pensions, I understand it's a difficult situation, but I believe we had a working situation and have sort of sidestepped that. And then I'm very concerned about funding for public education and particularly for charter schools that I see simply as a drain on public education rather than something that will help the students.
When we talk to voters, there are always a few questions that come up that are always of concern to people. One of those is the issue of business competitiveness. What do you feel the state of Kentucky should be doing, if not right to work? What should it be doing to improving competitiveness to attract more businesses or to grow state-grown businesses?
Well, two good things, and one of them is education, is that that is the part of job attracting that takes the longest time. We can put up a building or a road or a bridge relatively quickly, but the workers that we need may be in kindergarten right now, and we've got that long involved in getting them educated and prepared to do the jobs of the 21st century rather than the more blue-collar jobs historically in the state. And then on the other side of that is we have to improve broadband coverage statewide. There are so many businesses fully determined on having that access, and here in Kentucky we do not have it in a widespread way.
Both of those issues, education, we happen to have here in Central Kentucky, in the city of Campbellsville, two very good public schools. We also have Campbellsville University, which is a regionally and well-acclaimed university. But when we graduate students who have the skills that you're talking about, they have a tendency to want to leave the area. What do you think that we can do to keep our homegrown talent from moving out of Kentucky and taking their skills somewhere else?
Well, we have to provide the kind of attractive venue that the businesses need, and that some of that does come back to having the better internet coverage that allows businesses to function quickly and easily. That then can provide the jobs for the persons to try to keep them here, and we don't keep farming out our best talent. And we have good energy rates in Kentucky. We should be a draw for manufacturing, but our education is lagging and we need to improve it. And our skilled trades training continues to need improvement. We've got to match what the new industry is rather than what we were doing 50 years ago.
The state of Kentucky has another problem which is tied to these two issues. Nationally, we're having a problem with the opioid crisis and changes in drug addiction. And certainly, rural Kentucky, central Kentucky is no stranger to this problem. Do you feel the state of Kentucky needs to be doing more to address the opioid crisis? Do you think it's really just a local issue? How do you think we can best tackle that?
Well, I really appreciate that the state's attorneys general from across the country are addressing the manufacturers of these opioids because there's no reason under current regulations for pharmaceutical companies to be sending hundreds of thousands of doses of opioids into a community of a couple of thousand people. The onus is already on them to track where these drugs go, and they're not doing it. So there has to be better enforcement against the companies that are providing them. And then we've got to provide some reason for the person to, or a way for them to get off of the opioids. Be that some of the current interdictions, or if we need to look at new interdictions, things that make it possible for the person to break the habit of the opioids, and then a reason to. And the lack of work has been a big part of that. I know in both ends of the state in particular, the loss of jobs in more traditional industries has caused a great deal of despair, and that leads to wanting some way out, and the opioids are taking that position. But here locally, it's terrible. The drug problem in Campbellsville is no different than the rest of the state. How we deal with that, I'm not sure that passing one more law is going to correct that. We have to deal with the people rather than the punishment.
As I go around talking to local politicians who are running for offices here in the city or just for Taylor County, we always talk about the problem of budget cuts. And certainly one of the goals of the governor and a thrust of the legislature has been to figure out how to trim down the size of the budget, in part because they wanted to provide tax relief. However, these budget cuts, they're posing problems for our local governments. Do you feel like the state level budget cuts are harming local governments and their ability to address some of these issues? Do you feel like we need to reverse those budget cuts? Where do you stand on that issue?
Well, I do. The state mandates things that the local governments must do, and historically have provided funding with that. And with the budget cuts, they're turning over a lot of that expensing to the local governments without giving any way to raise the revenue to do it. The local option sales tax, some of these things that are possible in some states, we don't have that so that we can take on special projects, but also simply with the insurances and some of the pension things that are being passed on to counties, there's not the way to raise the revenue for it. The state needs to maintain control of what they've already mandated that it must do.
Do you feel that the state of Kentucky needs additional sources of revenue? Do you feel like we should be raising revenue or looking for other tax options?
Yes, we constantly need an increased level of revenue, an increased number, simply because we have a growing population. And we have greater demands. The people want certain things and they want it paid for. And so part of the state legislature and the governor's job will be to say, here is what you want and here's what it takes to pay for it. Are you willing to pay for it? And if not, then you can't have everything you want. So that I think revenue needs to increase. Finding ways to do that are the least painful and least regressive, I think will be important for how we cover that additional need for revenue.
There were two fundamental changes to tax law that came out of the last legislative session. One was a move towards expanding sales tax to cover services that previously weren't. Another was to try to flatten the tax code so that higher end taxpayers did not have to pay as high of a tax rate. Where do you stand on these two tax changes?
Well, first on the sales tax on services, that seemed to have come out of nowhere. I'm sure it's been discussed for a long time. The issue is not so much the taxes on services. We would get used to that. But then it was a pick and choose who has to pay it, what services are going to be affected, and therefore what services are going to be negatively affected by that increased tax. As a friend of mine that is an attorney said, the reason we didn't get a tax is we've got better lobbyists. And so if we're going to do a service sales tax, then we need to make that very broad and not pick and choose what industries have them. And on the income tax, the person at the lowest taxable income level got a 250% increase in their tax rate, while the person at the very top got a 17% tax cut. It would seem to me that if you knew you had to raise revenue, if everyone went up 1% or a 0.5%, would get the revenue, but we're doing a great deal of protecting at the top end and putting greater burden on the low end.
There are a couple of other issues that we have to talk about because they were so important in the last legislative session. You touched on one of these, the question of pension reform. Certainly the governor has been a big proponent and has argued that pension reform is absolutely necessary. What are your thoughts on the recent pension reforms the legislature put forward? Do you have any alternatives on how to solve the problem of the pension?
Well, the legislature did well in funding the pension fully this year. And administrations from both parties have not funded it in the past. So there's plenty of blame to go around as to why our pension is in the position it is. But this goes back to 2013. There were changes made to make sure that the state pension would be funded. And leadership that's there now were among those who were hailing it at the time. And so the changes necessary have already been brought about, but then not funded. And so the fault comes back to the legislature for not putting the money there and very often taking money from the pension fund that the employees have actually put in for their own retirement. And that's how we've covered general budget deficits. And we're taking money that does not belong to the citizenry in general and paying off those issues rather than looking to the future.
We also should talk at least a little bit about education funding, something else that you've touched on. Over the past several years, there's been a decrease in the financial commitment from the state. I believe in the last legislative cycle, they did fully fund education. Do you feel that the state legislature needs to be appropriating more money for both secondary and post-secondary education, or do you feel that our funding levels are appropriate now?
Certainly, K through 12 is so tightly, the budget is just so tight, there's no room for any kind of improvement in educational process. And so there does need better funding. The legislature this past did put the largest dollar amount in, but when we account for inflation, we're still losing ground. And so we need some way to mark where we are and work from that point and increase funding. And if I may say, there is one of the other areas that I will work from the beginning is opposing charter schools. The schools already do not have enough funding to do what they need to do, and taking some out to start a charter school that in turn assumes it can make a profit on what the existing public schools simply can't even survive on. It doesn't make any business sense. The only way that you can still provide some education and make a profit is provide an even lesser education than we're currently doing.
When most of the viewers who will be watching these podcasts will be checking in, will be in the few days or maybe the week or two before the election. And they'll be deciding not just about your race, but about races all over the region and all over the state. Is there one thing, one issue, one characteristic that you feel sets you apart, not just from your opponent in this race, but apart from other candidates that voters need to be aware of?
Well, in general, what I would say is that I have a demeanor that allows me to work with a broad range of people, whether I agree with them or not. I can maintain my calm and see the issues. I can look at both sides of an issue, even if I don't like the other side. I can at least understand where the person's coming from when they're expressing that. And so I think that I'm just well prepared to step into this particular time, at this time when there's so much division, to be a non-divisive person as much as is possible within the struggles within legislature.
Mr. Steele, I thank you for your time. And for those of you who are joining us watching these at home, in your car, or on your cell phone, I appreciate you checking in. If you haven't already, this podcast is just one in a series of podcasts where we've been discussing issues with our local city and regional candidates. So go and check those out. And until then, one final thing, on November 6th, please go vote. God bless.